A raven watches, a bitter loaf hides death. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Comment your city. I love hearing them. Let's uncover Wolfe's darkest bakery secret. I don't usually pay much attention to what comes through our front door before noon. If it's a delivery boy, I tip him. If it's a client, I park them in the office until Wolfe decides the orchids have had enough of him. This time, though, I took notice, because the visitor wasn't the type to carry a paper-wrapped loaf of bread like it was the crown jewels of Carthage. She was in her mid-30s, dark hair, and nervous as a politician with a truth serum appointment. The loaf was round, dense-looking, and had the kind of crust that could double as a blunt weapon in a back alley. She asked if this was Nero Wolfe's residence, and I told her that unless she had a better guess, she was right. "I need to see him," she said. "It's urgent." That's a word that doesn't mix well with Wolfe's morning schedule, which is 2 hours in the plant rooms, followed by lunch. Interruptions at that stage are like tossing a firecracker into a monastery. I told her she'd have to wait until 1 o'clock. She looked at the bread, then back at me, and said, "No, he has to see this now, please. Tell him it's about the raven." Now, I don't know every secret society or pastry chef in town, but I do know when a phrase carries enough weight to get past Wolfe's embargo. So, I ferried the message upstairs. Wolfe was in the plant rooms, sleeves rolled, face flushed from the steam. When I relayed the raven, he shut his eyes like I'd read him a bad poem, then sighed. "Phooey, bring her in, and the loaf." Back in the office, the woman introduced herself as Mrs. Celia Ransom. She set the bread on Wolfe's desk like it was Exhibit A in a murder trial. Wolfe eyed it, frowned, and leaned back, his lips compressed. "It is a sourdough," he pronounced as though delivering a sentence. "Baked with rye flour, dense crumb, a crust brushed with egg, and vinegar. Intolerable. Why are you bringing me this atrocity?" Mrs. Ransom's hands clutched at her handbag. "Because," she said, "my husband died last week. They called it a heart attack. But I found this loaf on our doorstep the morning after. He had eaten a slice the night before." Archie Goodwin, that's me, is not in the habit of taking bread seriously. But I noticed Wolfe's expression. His eyes narrowed, not with curiosity, heaven forbid, but with irritation. Something about that loaf had elbowed its way past the orchids. "Madame," Wolfe said, his voice low and precise, "your loaf disturbs me. Sit, you will explain." And just like that, the sanctity of the brownstone was breached by rye, vinegar, and a whisper of a raven. Fritz had come in at my knock with the discretion of a cat on felt slippers. He looked at the loaf as if it had insulted his whisk. Wolfe gestured 2 fingers. Fritz produced a linen towel from nowhere, settled the bread on it, and stood at attention. If Wolfe was disturbed, Fritz was affronted. Vinegar on crust is not the way to win friends in our kitchen. "Mrs. Ransom," Wolfe said, "state the facts, not your forebodings. Begin with the raven." She was holding herself together by a thread, but she had good thread. "Albert, my husband, founded a cooperative kitchen and tasting room in the West 50s. He called it the Raven's Table. He said it sounded less pretentious than society and less commercial than brand. He believed in apprenticeships. Bakers and caterers could rent time, sell small batches, get reviewed. The emblem was a black raven. He liked the quote about crumbs. I never did. "Poe," I put in. "Nevermore. Crumbs forever." Something like that. She gave me a glance that didn't have room for humor. Wolfe didn't even spare me one. "Your husband died last Thursday night. He was at the Raven's Table for a private tasting. He came home early, midnight. He said he felt heavy and shouldn't have had second helpings. He went to bed. I found him on the floor at 6. The ambulance. They said it was a heart attack. He was 51, Mr. Wolfe, and strong. He had his checkup in March, and the doctor said he was healthier than his clients. Name of the doctor? I asked. Dr. Anselmi. But the city medical examiner took over. They did not perform— She stopped and swallowed. They did not perform a full toxicology. They said there was no indication to— Wolfe grunted, which for him is a confetti shower. And the loaf? The morning after, the morning I was home alone. This was on our stoop. The paper had a black stamp of the raven. No note. I didn't cut it. I brought it to you because Albert's partner, Mr. Voss, had an argument with him that afternoon about turning bitter. Albert said someone was adulterating test batches to sabotage reviews. He wanted to close for a week and audit supply chains. Voss said a week would kill them. Voss's full name, I said. And which Voss? The kind that shakes hands with 2 fingers or the kind that uses the full set? Greer Voss. He does the business. There's also a baker, Hanneke Oel, and a spice importer who consulted Kedar Rao, and a food journalist, Maris Dell, who was close to the project. Close how? I asked, because that's my department and sometimes it is also my fun. Close, she said. Albert wrote her emails at midnight. He said publicity saved apprentices. Wolfe closed his eyes. If he'd had a string, he would have pulled it to draw the shade on me. The loaf came after his death, he said, without a message. And you connected it to the quarrel and to the word bitter. She nodded. And the vinegar. He hated shortcuts, Mr. Wolfe. He said vinegar was for cleaning glass, not for crust. Wolfe's eyes opened. They did not roam to the bread. They stayed on her. You expect that I will find not a murderer, perhaps, but a saboteur who killed coincidentally or by calculation. You expect that I will show that your husband did not die of gluttony. I expect, she said, the thread holding, that you will tell me whether I am being made a fool, and by whom. Fritz drew a breath. Wolfe tilted his head. Archie. Yes, sir. Call Dr. Vollmer. Ascertain what the medical examiner did and did not do. Names, dates, reports, not adjectives. Then telephone the Ravens table. Invite Mr. Voss to come here at 3 with Ms. Oel. If they protest, tell them Mrs. Ransom has engaged us. Mrs. Ransom, you are engaging us. She looked at the loaf, then at Wolfe. Yes. The retainer is satisfactory, he said, and named a figure that would have bought a new oven and a used car. Her nod was stiff but definite. I'll also need, he went on, an inventory of your husband's effects removed from the premises by any person other than yourself. And, his voice thinned, that object is not to be cut, crumbled, or invaded by amateurs. Fritz murmured, Gott sei Dank, which is either a hymn or a culinary policy. While I took Mrs. Ransom into the front room to write down addresses, phone numbers, and the parts of her marriage that might intersect with sabotage, the bell rang. At that hour, it's usually a package or a salesman, but the package had handwriting and my name on the label, not Wolfe's. I signed and brought it into the office. It was a flat envelope, heavy. Fritz had set the vinegar loaf under a glass cloche like a museum piece and was now standing guard. Wolfe lifted a brow, my cue. I opened it. Inside was a sheet of butcher paper stamped with a raven, exactly like Mrs. Ransom's description, and a single line in block type, cut and pasted from print like a schoolboy kidnapper. It said, You'll taste what you praise. I showed it to Wolfe. He looked at Fritz. This is intolerable. His gaze flicked to the globe bar, not for cognac, but because the brownstone had just been referenced in the second person by someone outside it. He was not a man who liked to be addressed by strangers through my mail. Archie, he said, the envelope. I had it already. No return address. Mailed at Grand Central yesterday evening, according to the stamp. I bagged it. The only prince it was going to pick up from now on would be mine, and I was careful not to oblige. Mrs. Ransom came back with the numbers. I showed her the butcher paper. She pressed her lips together and worked at not making a sound. That's the stamp, she said. "The raven has one bent feather. The apprentice who made it thought it was a flaw. Albert kept it. He said good marks should have a scar." "Who has access to the stamp?" Wolfe asked. "Greer and Hanneke, of course. The apprentices. Maris. They let her back of house more than I liked. Kedar supplied spices and had a drawer for samples." She looked at Fritz as if to apologize for the existence of other kitchens. "Wolfe told me to get Volmer and the Raven's table." Volmer answered on the first ring, because he answers for us. He confirmed what she'd said. The ME saw no trauma. The heart showed changes consistent with sudden arrhythmia. They took routine bloods, but did not run an expanded panel. If we wanted a toxicology, it would have to be a polite squeal to authority. Inspector Kramer, with whom politeness is not always our chief exchange. I gave Wolfe the gist. He shut his eyes again and breathed. "Phooey." Greer Voss took longer to catch. When he landed, his voice had overtones of schedule and underlay of panic. He didn't want to come. He suggested I come there. I suggested he come here, or I would be forced to mention to a friend downtown that the Raven's table had received anonymous communications implying adulteration. We negotiated. He agreed to 3, bringing the baker. I told him Mrs. Ransom would be present. He said that was not his preference. I said my preference was punctuality. When I hung up, the brownstone's pressure changed. You wouldn't think a loaf of bread and a sheet of butcher paper could alter the air in a house built by men who liked bricks, but they did. The intrusion was not noise. It was a hand on a doorknob we keep shut. Wolfe adjusted himself in his chair, a motion the untrained would call nothing. In our language it meant, our house is now an instrument, and I intend to play it. "Mrs. Ransom," he said, "we will receive them at 3. You will sit there. You will say as little as your grief and your temper allow. Mr. Goodwin will ask questions. I will listen. If my assumptions are correct, someone will attempt to use our rooms as a stage. I will not permit it, but I will profit by the attempt." "And if your assumptions are not correct?" she asked. He looked at the loaf at last, not to eat, but to weigh. "Then we will make new ones. Mr. Goodwin, lock that door. I will not have any more post." Locking the door was symbolic, but symbols can earn their keep. I slid the bolt and pocketed the key. Fritz departed with the sacramental air of a man guarding a relic from unwashed pilgrims. Mrs. Ransom sat where Wolfe had assigned her, knees together, hands folded, a woman who had learned posture at finishing school and resilience in a kitchen full of deadlines. Wolfe watched her as he watches an orchid after repotting. No sympathy, exact attention. At 5 to 3, the bell announced our first pilgrims anyway, because a locked front door only means the back door gets more interesting. I opened and found Greer Voss with a card in his hand, and an apology he thought would pass as charm. He had the kind of jaw that comes from gnawing pencils and margins. His suit cost money, but not his, and his tie had a novelty weave you could get in bulk for a staff holiday photo. With him was Hanneke Oel, tall, spare, hair pulled back like a wire. Her eyes were the color of steel that had seen heat and cold and preferred neither. "We were told Mrs. Ransom would be present," Voss said, stepping over the threshold as if he might be charged for the minute. "I'm here as managing partner to understand the scope of, what we're discussing." "In that case," I said, "you can manage to hang your coat. This way." I took them to the office. When Hanneke saw the cloche and the loaf under it, her chin lifted a 1/4 inch. Bakers know their own as a violinist knows a scratch. Wolfe acknowledged them with a blink. "Mr. Voss, Miss Oel. Sit if you're capable of stillness." Voss started with condolences as if he could sweep them across the room and out the window. Mrs. Ransom acknowledged by moving her eyes and not her mouth. Hanneke didn't pretend. She kept hers on the bread and said, "To no one and everyone, that is not ours." "It bears your raven," I said, "and a feather kink. Trademarked flaws are the fashion." She met it. "Stamps move," Apprentice hands smear ink and carry it to paper they ought not. That crust. She stopped and looked at Wolfe instead of me. A wise shift. Whoever made that wanted a bitter wash. It's clumsy. Clumsy saboteurs still poison wells, Wolfe said. You both were at the tasting on Thursday. Voss nodded. From 6 to 10. We hosted a small table, 10 people, investors and influencers. Albert loved to preside, but he was on edge. He accused the apprentices of... His glance skittered to Hanneke, then to Mrs. Ransom, and he tried to redirect. We had a disagreement over operating hours. Hanneke didn't help him. He said someone had swapped a spice blend. I said if he kept the spice drawer like a magpie, we wouldn't be guessing which jar had walked. You're saying he was careless, Mrs. Ransom said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't gratitude. I'm saying kitchens are chaos tamed by routine, and we had too many visiting hands. Hanneke folded her long fingers. If you want names, ask who had, how do you say, skin in publicity. Albert wanted an audit, others wanted a launch. Others like me, Voss said, smiling with only teeth. I wanted to avoid panic and revenue loss over a suspicion. Others like Maris, Hanneke added. She wanted a headline. There it was, the first stone in the circle. I inquired whether our journalist friend would be joining this tea party. She's en route, Voss said. You invited her, didn't you? I invited no one but you two, I told him. But communications travel on a scent, and your phone smells like group chat. Before he could respond, the bell saved him. I went and returned with Maris Dell and a man who introduced himself, without being asked, as Kedar Rao. Maris had the kind of face cameras like because it translates light into angles. She wore her notebook like jewelry and her eyes like a license. Kedar was compact and composed. His tie had a foreign knot that probably has a proper name, and his hands smelled faintly of pepper and cardamom even through the city air. I'm not a suspect, Maris said, as if making a pledge to the flag. I'm a witness and a friend. That's what makes you useful, I told her, showing the chairs. And dangerous. Kedar inclined his head at Mrs. Ransom. My condolences. His voice had the clarity of a man who sells with words. I reviewed your spice catalogues last month. Albert was meticulous about provenance. He was less meticulous about locking drawers. There seems to be a chorus, I said. Either the drawer robbed itself, or we'll need a drawer whisperer. Wolfe gestured once, which is a paragraph. The room settled. You are here because an object was left at Mrs. Ransom's door and a message at mine. The object is a crude facsimile of your house bread with an adulterated crust. The message is a threat couched as an aphorism. You will tell me, in order, what you did between 5 p.m. Thursday and 8 a.m. Friday, including any dealings with the emblem of your raven, the apprentices who stamp it, and any publicity decisions made with Miss Dell. You will not digress. Mr. Goodwin will tidy your omissions. They did not argue. They told. Voss layered times with calls, texted with a man named Lawton from some venture fund, signed invoices before the tasting, clinked glasses, argued with Albert at 9 about the audit, left at 10:15, Uber, apartment, emails until midnight. No raven stamps touched, no loaves delivered. He said it while his eyes travelled to the cloche 3 times. Hanneke took the blocks and laid them cleaner. She prepped dough at noon, tested spice blends at 3, threw out 2 batches because some genius put coriander where cumin should be, which was either an honest culinary tragedy or a parable. She served at 7, stayed after to scrub because the dishwasher called in sick, left at 11:40, subway home. She looked at Maris when she said served, and I filed it. Maris wrote her own alibi like copy. She arrived at 6:15, took photos, interviewed 2 apprentices. They were scared of Albert that night. Posted a teaser to her subscribers, left at 9:30 because she had another event to cover uptown, filed at midnight, DM'd Albert a link, no reply. He liked the angle last week, she said softer. He wanted the apprentices credited. Kedar was the neatest. He dropped by at 4 to deliver a sample of telecherry pepper and a Sri Lankan cinnamon he swore on his grandmother could make New Yorkers weep. He had tea with Albert at 4:30, discussed a bulk order, left at 5:15, dinner with a client, home by 10, no interaction with stamps, breads, or birds. As each one finished, Wolfe's eyes made tiny journeys that would not impress an untrained watcher, but to me were signposts. He paused 1 beat longer on the dishwasher called in sick, 2 beats on DM'd Albert, and nearly a measure on bulk order. He let silence sit, and silence did what it always does here. It sorted the true from the rehearsed. "Who controls the Raven stamp between midnight and morning?" he asked finally. "Usually me," Hanneke said. "I lock it in the proofing cabinet because I'm the one there first." Voss coughed. "It lives in a drawer in the office." "Sometimes," Hanneke said. "Always," Voss said and smiled at me, as if we had shared a joke. "Who else has a key?" Wolfe asked. "Apprentices," Hanneke said. "We're not Versailles. We run." Maris lifted a finger, a classroom habit. "Albert gave me access for a feature last week, one afternoon. Supervised." She shot a look at Mrs. Ransom that wasn't apology and wasn't defiance. It was a professional claiming her credential. "And you?" Wolfe said to Kedar. Kedar spread his hands. "I had a drawer for samples. If the stamp wandered while I was there, I didn't see it, but I saw apprentices stamping bags for a pop-up at the door at 8. "Which apprentices?" I asked. "Sylvia and Ori," he said promptly. Sylvia's sleeves were flour to the elbow. Ori stamps like he's scared to bruise paper. Hanneke nodded despite herself. "True." Wolfe let out air. "You all had motive to prefer calm to alarm. Mr. Voss prefers profit to panic. Ms. Oul prefers order to audit. Ms. Dell prefers story to silence. Mr. Rao prefers the integrity of his spices to the ruin of a scandal. Yet someone chose to communicate through the language of your trade in the most vulgar dialect. The question is not only who, but when. The loaf was delivered after Mr. Ransom's death. The message to Mr. Goodwin was posted before the loaf was known to us. This is either stupidity or choreography." Voss bristled. "Are we being accused of choreography?" "Not yet," Wolfe said. "But you are all dancers on a small stage." I asked about the dishwasher. Names are cheap. Alibis cost. The dishwasher was named Barney Roth. He had a sick mother and an unreliable alarm clock, and, according to Hanneke, a habit of losing his gloves and borrowing others. She delivered it without rancor, which made me like it less. We rounded the hour, and Wolfe dismissed them as a magistrate dismisses witnesses. Without favor, without farewell. In the hall, Voss turned to me. "This is disruptive," he said. "I hope you understand there's a business to run." "I hope you understand there's a widow in the room," I told him. "Tell Barney to take his temperature and keep it where we can see it." Maris lingered at the door. "You don't like journalists," she said. "I like anybody who doesn't leave ravens on stoops." "I didn't," she said, "but someone wants a performance. You can feel it." "I can," I said. "Just be sure you're not buying tickets for all your friends." Kedar bowed fractionally and left the scent of pepper behind. Hanneke paused with her hand on the newel. "That loaf," she said to me, not looking at it, "was painted by a coward." When the house was empty of everyone but us, I locked the door again. Wolfe didn't speak for a full minute. Fritz breathed less. Mrs. Ransom had sat without moving, and now she exhaled, a long thread paying out. "Archie," Wolfe said at last. "Saul." "On it," I said, reaching for the phone. "Tell him to shadow the raven or the coward?" "Neither," Wolfe said. "Tell him to shadow our dishwasher." Saul Panzer doesn't need instructions spelled out with semicolons, but I gave him the full line anyway. "Dishwasher," Name of Barney Roth. Absent Thursday night. Alibi loose as pie dough. Saul said he'd start where Barney lived and work forward. When Saul says that, you can take it to mean he'll know Barney's sock drawer better than Barney by sunrise. When I hung up, Mrs. Ransom was already on her feet. Her face wasn't grief's, too rigid for that. It was something harder. If one of them did this, if they touched Albert's bread, Wolfe lifted a palm like a traffic cop. Madam, we know nothing yet. Sit. Anger is no substitute for data. She sat stiff. Fritz re-entered, balancing a tray with coffee for me, beer for Wolfe, and water for her. The loaf sat under glass, center stage, its crust as ugly as sin and twice as suggestive. Archie, Wolfe said between sips, you will call Inspector Kramer. Tell him what Dr. Vollmer told us, not more. Offer him the loaf if he wishes to order an analysis. He will bluster. That is his métier. He will consider whether he should acknowledge our intrusion. He will accept the loaf because he does not trust us, which is fine. Meanwhile, Saul will do what the police will not. I made the call. Kramer did bluster, and for variety he threw in a growl or two. You want me to pull a toxicology on a guy who dropped dead of a heart attack on the say-so of his widow and Wolfe's bellyache? Not quite, I said. On the say-so of a suspicious loaf and a poison pen note that turned up at our stoop. That slowed him a half beat. What note? I described it. He swore. All right, I'll send Pearlie by for the bread. But if this turns into another one of Wolfe's opera stagings, I'll make sure the curtain falls on you both. Bring flowers, I suggested, and hung up before he could offer me a solo. Mrs. Ransom left soon after, promising to gather her husband's papers. She walked out under a weight. The brownstone was quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet. Once your living room hosts, suspects and vinegar loaves. Silence feels thinner. Wolfe didn't resume orchids or books. He sat, still as carved stone, eyes closed, lips compressed. I knew that posture. The brain was simmering. If I interrupted, I'd get scolded. So I gave him the courtesy of space and put my own minutes to use. First stop, the Ransom apartment, where Mrs. Ransom had promised files. It was 3 blocks west of Park, a neat place with more books than knickknacks. She had stacked Albert's notebooks on the table. Flour dust clung to one like it had been through a blizzard. I scanned entries, spice ratios, supplier names, a column of initials, SU, OR, SR, HR, apprentices. Beside OR's name, Albert had written a note. Careless. Beside SU, watch fingers. She hovered while I worked. He was meticulous, she said, but not suspicious by nature. When he wrote careless, he meant like a teacher means, not criminal. Sometimes the careless make good camouflage for the criminal, I said, pocketing a couple pages of photocopied notes. Did he ever lock these up? In his desk, but the drawers were rifled Friday morning. I thought police. No, they said they never touched them. That earned a mental underline. Someone had an early look at Albert's thoughts, maybe before Mrs. Ransom herself. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was awake in every sense. He had tilted his head an inch left, which meant progress. I laid the photocopies before him. He frowned at the initials, then said, Saul will confirm. But we must consider not only motive but artistry. This loaf was not baked to nourish. It was baked to speak. Its language was vinegar and egg. Who among them speaks thus? Not Voss. He'd send a bill, not a loaf. Not Ms. Oul. She has contempt for cowardice. Maris would write it, not bake it. Mr. Rao would never abuse a spice. His livelihood depends on reverence. Which leaves the apprentices, I said. Ori and Sylvia. And maybe Barney, the disappearing dishwasher. Wolfe's lips curved. Not a smile, but the acknowledgement of a deduction crossing his mind's desk. Barney, A man who borrows gloves. The bell rang again at an hour when unexpected visitors are rarely welcome. I went, half expecting Pearlie with a warrant for the loaf. It was Pearlie without a warrant, but with a frown deep enough to bury a loaf. "Where is it?" he asked. "In the kitchen," I said. "But careful, Fritz has it on parole." He growled, but took the cloche, and with it the bread, muttering about Wolfe's stomach lining being a public nuisance. As he turned to leave, he added, "Toxicology's a week at best. Don't call me till then unless you've got a corpse." I thought about telling him corpses aren't like taxis. You don't order them up, but save the breath. When the door closed, Wolfe said, "It is no matter. The loaf has served its function." Which is, to disturb, to expose a fissure. The guilty have already leaned to conceal, and in doing so, they have pointed. He opened his eyes. "Archie, tomorrow you will interview the apprentices. Together, if possible. Apart, if necessary. Bring me not what they say, but how they breathe when they say it." That was my assignment, and I accepted. But I didn't like the rhythm. If someone had gone to the trouble of vinegar and stamps, they weren't likely to stop at one act. I had a feeling the Ravens' table wasn't done sending us courses. That feeling was confirmed when Saul called it 10. His voice was quiet, but every syllable carried weight. "Archie, your dishwasher, Barney Roth. He's gone. Packed 2 bags yesterday. Neighbor says he left a note on the table. Said only, 'Better bitter than buried.'" I repeated it to Wolfe. He shut his eyes again, but this time his shoulders shifted, a tremor in the monument. "Pfui, Archie, tomorrow may not wait." And with that, the brownstone held its breath, while outside the city moved, and somewhere a raven beat its wings. Saul's line went dead and left the room humming. Wolfe didn't open his eyes. He didn't have to. "He did not write that," he said. "You mean Barney?" "I mean the sentence. It is not his. It is a slogan passed hand to hand. We will find it has been said before." "By whom?" "By the one who wants the word bitter to do more work than it is paid for." He lifted a finger. "Go. Not to the widow. To the apprentices. Now." Night air had rinsed the day off the city, but it hadn't cooled the kitchens. The Ravens' table was half lit, the front room dim shapes of chairs and the looming silhouette of a chalkboard menu. In back, a rectangle of yellow light made a stage of stainless steel. I rapped on the glass. A slim girl with flower freckles and hair stuffed into a bandana came to the door and squinted at me like I might be a late-order Danish. "Sylvia?" I asked. She nodded, ran a towel down her palms, and let me in with the resigned expression of a person who has already scrubbed twice. "If you're here to ask when we open again, you can read the sign. If you're here to ask about Albert, you're late." "I'm here to ask about Thursday night," I said, "and about a raven stamp that's been doing community outreach." Her mouth twitched. "We only have 1 stamp," she said automatically, then thought and amended. "Well, there's an old one. It doesn't ink right. We keep it in the pop-up box." "Pop-up box?" "For festivals. It's in the office. It's junk." Ori drifted in from the dish room carrying a crate like it might sneak away. He was all ears and caution. "We don't stamp bread," he said, in case I planned an accusation by category. "Bags sometimes and paper. Hanneke doesn't like the stamp near the dough. She says it's theatre." "Thursday," I said. "Tell it." Sylvia looked at Ori, who looked at the floor. She shrugged. "I burned a tray." Hanneke yelled. Albert yelled at the spices. Greer smiled like a dentist. Maris took pictures. Kedar dropped off little jars and made us smell them. "You want more?" "I want less. Less varnish." "Did anyone talk about vinegar?" "Vinegar." Ori glanced up. "Shantae, the dishwasher. Barney, he jokes. He says if a bread's ugly, you paint it with egg and splash vinegar. It shines like a liar's shoes." "Where did he pick that up?" Sylvia snorted. Internet, probably. Or from that guy who came in with Kedar last week, the one with the blog who says everything needs edge. He kept saying, bitter saves bland. Name? Dawson, she said, uncertain. He's a pallet, not a baker. Did Barney work Thursday? Sylvia's face closed. He was supposed to. He texted at 5 that his ma was sick. Hanukkah cursed him to the 6th generation. The office door was cracked. I didn't step in. Wolfe wouldn't thank me for content, but the pop-up box sat half out from a shelf, open. On top of a jumble of string and paper weights, a rubber stamp with a raven whose feather bent like a man with a crooked back. Beside it, a shallow dish smeared faintly pink where red ink had gone watery with cleaning. I looked at Sylvia. Who had this last? She frowned. No one. We haven't done a pop-up in 2 weeks. And yet, I said, it's here like a cat that's been out all night. I took out my notebook. Who closes? Keys? Hanukkah and Greer, Ori said soft. Sometimes Maris stays late. She has a code. Sylvia elbowed him. Shut up, Ori. Thanks, I told them. Consider yourselves interviewed. Don't stamp anything without permission. Don't repeat that joke about vinegar. They watched me go like kids watching the principal leave a classroom that still contained a detonator. Outside, the chalkboard menu had a line chalked faintly under the day's specials. You had to catch it at an angle. It said, better bitter than buried. I ran a fingertip over it. Chalk dust kissed my skin. If the slogan was a passphrase, it had traveled. Back at the brownstone, I found temporary evidence of life. The faint smell of Fritz's bourbon brown sugar sauce from dessert and a draft in the hall like someone had taken liberties with a window. In the kitchen, Fritz stood with his arms folded over his chest and a look that would curdle crème anglaise. Mr. Goodwin, he said, someone has been foolish. If Wolfe had been told first, he had not come to the kitchen to be foolish with him. I took the hint. Show me. He went to the spice rack like a priest to an altar. He lifted a small glass jar, tapped the lid with 2 fingers, and held it to my nose. Sumac, he said. We use it once a month, no more. I opened it to plan for lamb on Saturday. The seal was broken. The powder smells wrong. It smells cooked. Could be the manufacturer, I suggested, because you have to offer one polite lie before the truth. Fritz gave me a look that would have sent me to confession if I had ever been a communicant. The manufacturer is Mr. Rao, and his sumac is unimpeachable. This was warmed and closed. Someone wanted it less sharp. Someone wanted to show me he could reach and touch and withdraw. I took the jar with 2 fingertips and put it down like it was wired. The window over the alley was cracked a 1/4 inch. Fritz swore that he had closed it before dinner. The catch was not forced. It was simply open. We went to the office. Wolfe listened without comment, his eyes on the jar as if it were a chess piece moved 2 squares without permission. So, he said when I had finished, our intruder has a sense of humor. He swaps cumin for coriander there and warms sumac here to blunt its bite. He writes slogans and he polishes crusts. He believes that bitterness, diluted, will save him. Or she, I said. Or she, he agreed. It is still choreography. He turned his head a degree. The alley window tells us method. The sumac tells us intention. The chalk on your finger tells us circulation. The box tells us the old stamp has been handled. We will not wait for toxicology to confirm what I know. This is not poison by laboratory. It is manipulation by palate. He taints the palate, then the perception, then the evidence. He extended his arm. Give me the chalk, he said. I looked at my hand and wiped the finger on an envelope. He nodded. We will give Kramer his bread and his week. Meanwhile, we will bait with appetite. Tomorrow morning, Mr. Goodwin, you will go to Mr. Rao and purchase a fresh jar of sumac. You will be conspicuous. Then you will visit Miss Dell and you will let slip, clumsily, that Fritz suspected the jar because he noticed the color was milder. She will repeat it to the circle. Our friend will try again to correct your lie. And if he corrects it with something stronger than warming? I asked. Wolfe looked at the jar as though it had asked to sit in his chair. He will not yet. He wants to teach a lesson about taste. Let him try to teach me. I will attend class. The phone rang. I took it. Saul, again soft and patient. Barney bought a bus ticket at Port Authority for Philadelphia. Cash. He didn't use it. He met someone at the diner across the street at 6. Tall woman, hair in a scarf. They talked 10 minutes. Then he walked west with his bags and vanished. Name of the diner? Raven's Nest, Saul said with enough dryness to sand a table. Bring Wolfe that garnish. I set the receiver down. Wolfe's eyelids lowered a fraction. A tall woman in a scarf, he murmured. Miss Oule disdains cowards. Miss Dell adorns herself for cameras, not anonymity. Mrs. Ransom does not recruit dishwashers. That leaves a figure adjacent to Spice, or an apprentice emboldened by a disguise. Sylvia's 5'4", I said. Ori's ears would give him away. Then perhaps not an apprentice, Wolfe said. Perhaps a pallet. I said nothing, because the picture that formed was uncomfortable and wrong and likely true. The idea of a critic who thought bitterness was salvation, who would coach a dishwasher like a director coaching a chorus boy. Tomorrow, Wolfe said, closing his eyes again, we feed him a false note. And then, Mr. Goodwin, we will ask our raven to croak. Morning shook itself together with coffee and a list. Wolfe issued it in 12 words. Row first, be seen, then Dell. Drop the lie, report everything. He didn't add and don't improvise, because he knows me. He also knows I will. Kedar Rao's storefront is one of those places that makes you feel underdressed if you don't arrive with a mortar and pestle. Bells announced me, and a breeze of cloves, citrus peel, and something older wafted like a memory you couldn't place. Kedar appeared from behind a curtain with a banker's neat smile and a tea-seller's calm eyes. Mr. Goodwin, he said, do I get to be honest with you today, or only helpful? Helpful will do, I said, but I won't hold honesty against you. I took the jar from my coat as if it was a sleeping snake. Fritz thinks this sumac's gone soft. The color, he says, is milder. He wants a fresh jar. Your best. Kedar took the jar, sniffed once, twice, and gave it back like a priest returning a chalice. Someone warmed it, he said. Not much. Enough to dull the citric note. Color would not shift appreciably. Only the tang. If Fritz said color, he was being polite. Fritz is never polite about ingredients, I said. He's exact. Maybe my ear heard what my ignorance translated. I bought 2 jars with my wallet open and my voice louder than necessary. If there was an audience, it would get full value. Kedar wrapped them in brown paper and string, as if he distrusted modern adhesives. You are being conspicuous, he observed. Saving you the trouble of guessing, I returned. Another thing, this line, better bitter than buried. You ever hear it? He tilted his head. A silly mantra I heard from a palate last week, a blogger who followed me like a shadow through a tasting. Dawes? Dawson? He argued, bitterness is maturity. Sweetness is childish. He's the kind of man who would season grief. Tall woman in a scarf, I asked, matching a puzzle piece I didn't like. Kedar's mouth curved. No, a man who pronounces turmeric 3 different ways in one sentence. The woman with the scarf I saw with Barney one evening was... He searched memory. Hair in a scarf, yes. Tall, not a customer. She had the posture of staff. I pocketed the jars and the name that wasn't a name yet. If he returns, I said, sell him a thesaurus. Maris kept a desk in a co-working loft where everyone looked ready to pitch an app that would alphabetize your sock drawer. She was at a long table with her laptop up and an expression that said she was in the middle of inventing history. When she saw me, her eyebrows wrote their own headline. "Mr. Goodwin, am I your chosen vector?" "We all have gifts," I said, parking on a stool. "Fritz thinks the sumac that came back to our pantry looked milder. Not darker, milder. He wonders if someone warmed it. Do with that what your subscribers pay for." She typed 3 words before stopping herself. "Off the record." "On the record. This isn't gossip. It's a request for a reaction." "I react," she said, "by asking why your pantry is a battlefield." "Because somebody wants us to taste what we praise," I said. Her eyes flickered, and I knew she'd heard the line already. "Also, ever hear of a palate with a fondness for slogans? A Dawson." Her mouth quirked. "Damien Dawes. He prefers sensory consultant. He drinks bitterness like it's sacrament. He thinks vinegar is a personality trait. He did a video last week at the Ravens table about bittering America. He's obnoxious, but that's not a crime." "No," I said. "It just often keeps them in practice for one." I stood. "I wouldn't post anything you can't defend in a room where Wolfe is looking at you." "Tell him," she said, and for a second there was the friend under the journalist. Albert wanted to shut down because he loved The Apprentices more than the launch. He was right and stupid. Back home, Fritz had performed a small liturgy with the new jars. He set one on the rack and the other under the cloche that had housed the loaf. Wolfe's idea, not his. A hair, fine as spider silk, lay across the lid seam, its ends caught with a trace of sugar water you wouldn't see unless you were born in our kitchen. "You used your own?" I asked. "From my brush," Fritz said. "We will know if a mouse twitches." He also dusted the inside sill of the alley window with flour. "It is vulgar," he said, "but effective." Wolfe listened, eyes half closed. "You saw Mr. Rao and made a peacock of yourself. Good. Miss Dell?" Caught the bait without admitting she had. Dropped a name, Damien Dawes. Bitterness evangelist. "Pfui," Wolfe said, which in this case meant, "I have a place to put that piece." He rang for beer and left it untouched, which meant the place wasn't fully furnished. At 5:40, the brownstone did its trick where it feels a person before a person arrives. I was in the hall when a sound that was not a sound brushed the alley window, the faintest tap of glass, excepting a nail. I moved to the kitchen like an unhurried man and found nothing but a line on the flour at the sill, a short, curved tick where a finger had hesitated, then made decision. The hair across the jar lid was snapped. Fritz did not swear, he's a civilized man, but his inhale had the sharpness of a knife on steel. He touched the sugar dot, now smeared, and nodded. I lifted the lid with a cloth and leaned in. Sumac smells of tart lightness, a small red sun. This smelled of sumac, and something earthy underneath, rounder in the nose. Paprika? No. Annatto ground very fine, a botanist's rouge. It wouldn't change the color enough for a casual eye, but it would make a liar of anyone who said the jar had been warmed. It corrected our false note, exactly as Wolfe had predicted. I carried the jar into the office like a midwife. Wolfe tilted the spoon Fritz offered, took the barest dust to his tongue, and withdrew as if the spice had attempted a handshake without an introduction. "Annatto," he said. "Not a cook's choice for this deceit. A demonstrator's." She wanted to show she knew the difference between hue and heat. "She," I said. He opened his eyes fully. "I'm done accommodating the neuter. The alley visitor is a woman. The window catches high. The hesitation in the flour shows a left-handed reach and a careful manicure. Fritz's flour tells the truth. Ms. Oole's hands are baker's hands. Clean, blunt, unpainted. Ms. Dell's are a camera's hands. She files but does not polish when on assignment, which leaves a palette who performs, who costumes, a scarf to cover hair, a hand to make a point, or—" He let it hang, but I heard the name he hadn't said. Mrs. Ransom. Tall enough, yes, but she had neither motive to undercut her own grief nor opportunity last night without us seeing. The scarf from Saul's report had to belong to someone who moves where staff moves and fades where press fades. Between. The phone spared me speculation. Saul again. Sparse and sufficient. Damien Dawes posted at 4. Bitter is better. Watch this space. He filmed from a sidewalk with a black-painted raven behind him. That's the mural by the Raven's Nest Diner. He's not hiding. Thanks, I said. If he sneezes, say Gesundheit. When I relayed it, Wolfe turned the spoon in his fingers. We will let Mr. Dawes preen. He wants to be seen. Good. Meanwhile, we invite everyone back here tomorrow night at 8. Mr. Goodwin, tell them the sumac has embarrassed me in my own kitchen, and I demand an apology. They will come. No one refuses a spectacle in my office. He settled, the big frame composing itself. Tonight, we lock everything that breathes. Fritz, you will sleep knowing I expect to keep you in my kitchen tomorrow. And if the lady with the scarf prefers a stronger correction, I asked. Wolfe looked past me, past the window, at something nearer than air. She will not escalate until she has her audience, he said. She's not a poisoner. She's a pedagogue. Tomorrow I will let her teach, and then I will expel her. The next day behaved itself until it didn't. Spent the morning with a phone glued to my ear like a man selling umbrellas in a drought. Voss tried to wriggle. Evenings are operationally delicate, he said, which is a polite way to say he didn't want to sit in our office and perspire. I told him our evening was more delicate than his and that Wolfe expected his diligence at 8. He came around the way people do when they remember rent exists. Hanneke said she wouldn't bring a crew. I told her to bring the apprentices anyway. If you want them credited, I said, borrowing Marissa's line for a good cause, they should be present when the credits roll. She grunted assent. Maris didn't need convincing. She asked if recording was allowed. Your memory is allowed, I said. Your microphone depends on Wolfe's mood, which is temperate when unprodded. Kedar accepted without ceremony. Mrs. Ransom said only, I will be there. Saul checked in at 2. Dawes's schedule is a public diary. He teased a live taste debate at 8:30. Address vague, but he tagged the neighborhood. He wants proximity. I asked whether the scarf woman had made a second appearance. Not today, he said, but the camera kid who follows Dawes is a woman in a headscarf. Aaliyah. Shoots, edits, evangelizes. Tall. She orders double espresso and corrects waiters about water temperature. I thanked him and passed that garnish to Wolfe. He nodded once. The piece clicked somewhere inside that complicated head of his. Fritz floated through the office with the kind of quiet I file under weather updates. The kitchen had been restored to its armistice, the alley window locked, the flour dusted and swept and dusted again. On the office table, under the cloche, sat the second jar of Rao's sumac, unmarred and now serving as a lure and a witness both. At 7:30, the brownstone gathered itself, as a church does when it knows there will be a sermon with names in it. Wolfe made small positional edits to the room that would mean nothing to a stranger and everything to me. Shifting the red leather chair 3 inches, moving the globe bar a foot, placing a side table so it would force 2 people who disliked each other to share space. He had a plan for the distribution of glances, like a general has a plan for artillery. They came in waves. Voss first, with the air of a man who had just explained to his shareholders that there was nothing to worry about. Please enjoy the canapes. Hanneke next, with Sylvia and Ori in tow, both scrubbed within an inch of their paws. Maris arrived almost on their heels, notebook already open as if she feared the words might start without her. Kedar brought courtesy and a small paper packet he set on Fritz's tray like a peace offering. Mrs. Ransom came last of the invited, face composed, a new hardness around the mouth that said she had not slept and didn't plan to. Then our uninvited extended the courtesy of not pretending. Damien Dawes arrived with his head high and a scarfed videographer a pace behind. If he had knocked, I missed it. His arrival had the quality of a man entering a room he thought had been waiting for him. "Evening," he said, flashing teeth calibrated for thumbnails. "You must be the legendary Nero Wolfe. I'm Damien." "You're late," Wolfe said, and closed his eyes. It was not just disdain, it was placement. Dawes took the only seat left that gave him sight lines to everyone. Sometimes the room arranges the fool where you need him. Aaliyah hovered with her camera. I moved to block her, not bulkily, but inevitably. "No filming," I said. "House rules. You can keep the lens cap on and your ears open." "She documents," Dawes protested. "We're public educators." "This is a private lesson," I told him. "You can audit." Wolfe lifted one finger. The room shifted into quiet. "You're here," he said evenly, "because my kitchen was trespassed upon and made to taste a falsehood. You're here because Mrs. Ransom's home was made to receive a loaf that spoke in vulgarities. You're here because a phrase was thrown like grit, better bitter than buried. You will listen while I instruct you in the difference between palate and pretense." Voss made a sound like a cough. Dawes smiled at an invisible audience. Hanneke's eyes went to the apprentices, a habit she probably couldn't break if you paid her. Maris's pen trembled. She pressed it down. "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said, "the jars." I brought the 2 row jars, the untouched one under the cloche and the one that had been corrected with annatto. Fritz laid out 6 small porcelain spoons. "If you want to move a room without raising your voice, you pass them spoons." Wolfe didn't taste first. He never performs the trick before the mark reaches for it. "Miss Oole," he said, "you are honest. Taste." She did, professional and clean, a tap of tongue, a breath, a closed eye. "This," she said of the first, "is true. This of the second, with the faintest flare of contempt, is painted." "Painted how?" Dawes asked too quickly. "Not with heat," she said without looking at him, "with something round and soft. Annatto, or another seed ground fine." "Mr. Rao," Wolfe said. Kedar tasted in silence and inclined his head. Annatto. Anyone who wanted to correct the claim it was warmed would choose it. Children do color by numbers. Evangelists color by doctrine. "Evangelists," Dawes said, pleased to be named, even as a category. Wolfe opened his eyes a fraction. "Mr. Dawes, your thesis is uncomplicated. Bitterness is a sign of adult taste, and American kitchens are infantile. You prefer slogans to thought. You visited the Ravens' table. You drank their attention. You saw a stamp with a raven and a feather bent, and imagined you had found your sigil." Dawes shifted back. "Not far. Men like him believe chairs will accommodate them. I advocate for taste," he said. "If your chef—" "Fritz Brenner," Wolfe said very softly, "is not your chef. He is mine, and you adjusted his sumac with the help of a woman who moved like staff and pretended to be shade. I tolerate trespass in my house only when it serves me." Aaliyah's hand, light on the camera, flexed. Her nails were neat, not ostentatious, and polished with a pale, practical gloss. Her eyes did not flinch as easily as her boss's did. The flower on our sill had told its little truth. My eyes went to her hands and back. She met the look without apology. It was not guilt. It was a technician's pride in a clean job. Mrs. Ransom had not moved. She spoke for the first time. "Who left the loaf?" It was not a plea. It was a demanded noun. "In a moment," Wolfe said, and the room obeyed because his voice had the gravity of marble. "First, the circle. Mr. Voss, you traded panic for secrecy and nearly bartered your livelihood for a quiet launch. Ms. Oole, you guard your line with scorn that has value but no mercy. Ms. Dell, you confuse proximity with permission. Mr. Rao, you are what you say you are, and nothing worse. Mr. Dawes, you mistake provocation for philosophy. You have each carried a corner of a burden that broke a man's heart. The loaf was not poisoned to kill. It was displayed to deride. Maris flinched. Deride who? Mrs. Ransom, Wolfe said, not looking at her. And her husband's insistence on crediting apprentices over pallets and on shutting his kitchen to audit rather than opening it to theatrics. The loaf was a sneer in the language he loved. Dawes laughed. Now who speaks in slogans? Enough, Wolfe said. It was colder than anger. You, Mr. Dawes, will stop talking until spoken to. He shifted his gaze, and it landed like a hand on Aaliyah's shoulder without touching. And you will remove your scarf. There was a ripple of protest, and then the strange small silence when a test begins. Aaliyah's mouth tightened a fraction. She set the camera down, unwound the scarf, and let it drop to her neck. Hair pinned tight. Left hand lifted, unconsciously, to adjust a stray. The polish caught the light. The motion contained the hesitation I had seen in flour. Thank you, Wolfe said. Now we can proceed. Hanneke's head turned. Slow. Maris's pen stopped entirely. Voss's smile collapsed into his face as if he had found a mirror. Mrs. Ransom's breath changed, a sound you hear when a person revises what they are willing to know. Wolfe eased back into the leather, his fingers steepled, the tiny, satisfied economy of a man who has brought the quarry to the clearing without leaving his chair. Mr. Goodwin, he said, lock the door. The lock clicked, and a line drew itself around us, one of Wolfe's preferred geometries. He didn't raise his voice. He adjusted it, and the molecules complied. Mr. Lear, he said, as if we were continuing an old discussion, you went through my alley window last night and corrected a falsehood. You did it with a natto because you are intelligent and literal. You wanted to prove you could change hue without warmth. You snapped a hair Fritz had set as a tell. You hesitated at the sill, left hand, and you wear practical polish that takes flour like vellum takes ink. Her chin lifted a notch. I touched nothing harmful. That is your consolation, Wolfe said, not your absolution. He shifted a finger toward the cloche. You corrected because Mr. Goodwin dropped, with deliberate clumsiness, that my cook thought the color milder. You were fed that line through a conduit you trust. Maris stared at her own pen as if it had incriminated her. I posted a note to my paid list, she said, small. Not the recipe, never that. Just that Fritz suspected someone had fooled with a jar. It's news. It was responsible. It was naive, Wolfe said. You're too old for naivete and too young for cynicism. Choose better. Dawes leaned in, smelling a stage cue. Hold on, he said, palms open, a man addressing the jury he assumes is adoring. You're accusing a journalist of journalism and a camera operator of curiosity. Where is the crime? Under your foot, I told him. You've been stepping in it since you walked in. He flashed a smile like a switchblade. We coach taste, we provoke. No one died here. Mrs. Ransom didn't flinch at the verb. The muscle along her jaw rode it. Wolfe didn't look at her. He looked at Voss. Mr. Voss, did you invite Mr. Dawes into your kitchen? Voss swallowed a set of words and selected others. We engaged a range of influencers to seed the launch. English, Wolfe said. Yes, Voss said, color rising. He came in. I wanted the buzz. My investors wanted a story. Wolfe finished for him and turned to Hanneke. And you let him? I argued, she said flat. Albert told me to be civil. He said attention helps apprentices get jobs. I kept them away from the stamp. I failed. Not entirely, he said. You were not the one who whisked the retired stamp from the pop-up box, stamped paper, and left better bitter than buried chalked under your menu. You don't write on chalkboards when you're angry. You wipe them. His head tipped minutely. Miss Elia, She didn't blush. Professionals don't. "We stamped for B-roll," she said. "It's a shot. It says brand without showing faces. Chalk makes a clean plate." "And a slogan makes a clean conscience," Wolfe murmured. The phrase, "better bitter than buried," is Mr. Dawes's signature on this drab performance. It appeared at your board, at the diner wall behind your sidewalk sermon, on the paper you left at my door, and on the note you coached a frightened young man to write before. You pushed him to run. Dawes laughed, a bark. "We found a dishwasher who wanted to tell the truth about a kitchen that was hiding. If he left, it was because he was tired of being used," Saul's voice said from the hall, "because when Wolfe draws a circle, he also leaves one gap for allies." I opened. Saul came in on soft feet, a sheet of paper in his hand. "Barney didn't catch a bus," he told the room. "He caught a ride to a friend's couch and borrowed a phone." "That note you quoted?" Elias said it to him while Dawes filmed B-roll outside the diner. He wrote it down because he thought it was clever. He didn't know he was borrowing the rope. Elias' eyes slid to Dawes for the first time. It wasn't fear. It was appraisal. He gave her the same look men give a screwdriver that slips. Blame the tool. "Why mail us?" I asked. "Grand Central, the evening before Mrs. Ransom arrived." "To ensure a witness," Wolfe said, answering for them with the precision of a physician reciting symptoms. "Mr. Dawes wanted an audience with a reputation for appetite and disdain. He knows mine. He wished to compel me to attend his sermon, bitterness as virtue. He wanted me compromised by responding." Dawes spread his arms. "And here you are. I'd say you're a convert." "You'd say anything into a lens," Wolfe said, not moving. "Here is what you did. You found a kitchen whose founder valued apprentices and restraint. You needed a stage with textures and heat. Mr. Voss gave you access in exchange for buzz. You stroked the apprentices and mocked their caution. You borrowed the retired stamp and made a prop. After Mr. Ransom's death of natural causes, yes, madam, a heart that betrayed itself, we will have toxicology, but I need not wait. You and Miss Elia delivered a loaf with a vulgar wash to his widow's door to deride the man's palate. See, even your bread deserves bitterness. You chalked your slogan on a menu and a mural and slipped it into Barney's mouth to give it working-class gravitas. When I did not acknowledge your first invitation, you trespassed and corrected my trap to force my attention. Your thesis, Mr. Dawes, is not that bitterness is good. It is that bitterness is yours, and anything you touch must wear it so you may claim it." The room held. The apprentices were statues with pulse. Kedar's hands had moved to the back of the chair. He held it like a friend you have chosen carefully. Maris's eyes were on Elia now, not Dawes. Reporters eventually figure out where the story is. Dawes shrugged. "You can't arrest a point of view." "No," Wolfe said. "But you can arrest trespass, evidence tampering, intimidation, and interference with a death inquiry. You can arrest the coaching of a witness to flee. You can also haul in a managing partner who permitted unauthorized access that precipitated all of it." Voss made a sound I've heard from men who see the gate they thought was behind them swing shut in front. "This is insane," he said, but his voice lacked the voltage. Mrs. Ransom stood. "When a widow stands in our office, people sit smaller. You brought a loaf to my door," she said to Elia, and the calm in it had steel. "You took my husband's emblem and used it for a joke." Elia met it. "It was a symbol," she said. "We don't poison. We provoke. You humiliate," Mrs. Ransom said, "and that is poison to anyone who loved him." Wolfe inclined his head, a courtesy to accuracy. "Miss Dell," he went on, "you will forward to Inspector Kramer your post, your correspondences with Mr. Dawes, and any time-stamped note that shows when you shared our pantry rumor. Mr. Voss, you will deliver to him the access logs and codes relevant to Miss Elia's entries, and the last week of camera feeds. Yes, you have them. Miss Elia, you will give Mr. Goodwin your phone. Mr. Dawes, you will sit without pontificating until Sergeant Parker arrives with handcuffs. You're fortunate. If Mr. Ransom's death had been caused by your theatrics, you would be explaining yourself to a different audience. Dawes tried one more grin. It looked like a man adjusting a tie he wasn't wearing. You can't prove the loaf. You stamped it with a bent feather, Wolfe said. Hanukkah recognizes the miscut. The red ink you cleaned left a diluted trace in the pop-up dish. Your chalk dust is on Miss Aaliyah's scarf. Fritz's sugar water kept it there. You filmed yourself at the mural and time-stamped your proximity. Mr. Panzer will provide Barney. It is enough for a charge. It is more than enough for a prosecutor eager to make an example of the ethics you preach. He closed his eyes, not as dismissal, but as a final, precise punctuation. There's a way he breathes then, a small release that says the problem has become a file, and the file will be handed off. I heard the bell, and for once it was on cue. Pearlie Parker bulled in with a face that said he expected nonsense and found it arranged for him like a tray. I gave him the short version with the jar and the stamp and the scarf. Wolfe didn't speak. He doesn't bargain with law. He composes for it. Pearlie took Aaliyah's phone, then the scarf, bagged both. Dawes opened his mouth and got a palm from Pearlie that meant, try breath instead. Voss sat, suddenly unwell. Maris closed her notebook, not because the story was over, but because it had changed tense. Kedar touched Mrs. Ransom's elbow and then removed his hand, remembering she hadn't asked. Pearlie looked at Wolfe. You're telling me the corpse is still a heart attack. I'm telling you the crime is not death, Wolfe said. It is contempt. Pearlie grunted. That's not in the penal law. It is, Wolfe said. In mine. They left in a line that wasn't a parade. The room breathed. Fritz came in with the inevitable restorative. He does not bring cognac for victory scenes. He brings it for weather. Wolfe accepted beer at last, and I saw the shift back into the brownstone's rhythm, the house moving toward itself again. Mrs. Ransom waited until the door had closed on the last of them. Thank you, she said. Not like a cliché, but like a clear decision to place a thing where it belonged. Wolfe inclined his head again. We did not save your husband, he said. We did spare his bread from being rewritten. She gave a small sound that could have become many things and chose gratitude. Then she left, and the door test fit the jam, and the line around us erased itself until the next chalk. Dinner? I asked. In an hour, Wolfe said. Fritz will need to air the kitchen. Sumac? He made a small face. Not tonight. I have no desire to taste anyone's sermon. I sat and let the quiet reknit and waited for the piece Wolfe would add, the one that turns a solved case into something worth remembering. He didn't make me wait long. Wolfe let the house idle for 10 minutes, which in our calendar is an intermission. Pearlie's sedan had barely finished complaining down the block when the bell rang again. This time it was Kramer with a face like a winter sidewalk, salted and still slick. He looked at the room as if it had been busy without him, which it had, and at me as if I had done it on purpose, which I had. Where's the bread? He demanded. On your desk, I told him. Pearlie took it, along with a scarf and a phone and a man with a mouth. Kramer shifted his cigar to the other corner. I don't want your synopsis, Goodwin. I want Wolfe to say he didn't monkey with a death certificate. He didn't, I said, but it did try to monkey with him. We gave it a jar to chew. Kramer turned that on Wolfe. You and your groceries, he said. You run a grocer's opera. If you've complicated my job for a stunt, spare me, Wolfe said. He opened his eyes only halfway, and that was enough to make a grown inspector remove his hat. Your job is to protect the living and decently catalogue the dead. This performance attempted the opposite. I corrected it. By baiting an intruder, tampering with evidence, and locking people in your office? He threw the questions like coins to see if any would land on edge. By presenting them with their own behavior, tidied. Wolfe flicked a glance at me. Mr. Goodwin will give you copies of the correspondences and the names. Mr. Panzer has your dishwasher. He will meet you at the precinct. I already got him, Kramer grunted, with the weariness of a man whose job includes organizing other men's morals. Parker found him 2 blocks over, perched on his friend's stoop like a cat that doesn't know if it's welcome. He's scared, but he's not rotten. He confirms the scarf and the speechifying. As for the blogger, evangelist, I put in. Kramer shot me a look. He's in a cell trying to convince a sergeant that First Amendment covers breaking and entering if you use a kitchen window. You might tell him, Wolfe said, that in my house, the First Amendment is the right to silence. Kramer grunted something ancestral and took 2 steps toward the door, then paused. He hated it, so he did it quickly. Tox came back light. No exotica. Trace ethanol, trace caffeine, half a pharmacy's vitamins. The heart reads like it looks. Your widow will have a death certificate that says just that. You were right. Wolfe breathed once, the kind of breath that might be mistaken for satisfaction if you didn't know him. I did not want to be right, he said, but I was. Kramer left with the gait of a man lugging paperwork in his skull. I shut the door gentler than usual because it had done a lot of heavy lifting that day. Fritz came and fetched the cloche and the jar that had been our turned-down accompaniment. He did not forgive easily, but he forgives thoroughly. The kitchen would be pardoned by dessert. Saul arrived with a wink of air and Barney behind him. The kid looked scrubbed where fear had left fingerprints. He turned his cap in his hands and kept his eyes aimed at the corner where an unoffending spider kept a high-floor condo. I put him in a chair that didn't swallow him and set a glass of water within reach. You didn't poison anything, I told him. You were borrowed for a chorus. If you want to give Kramer a song, give him the right one. He'll let you go home once he's sure you'll pick up your phone when he calls. Barney's swallow sounded like a man teaching himself how. The lady. She said it was a campaign, he managed. She said kitchens needed honesty. Honesty, I said, is often what we call our preferences when we want them to be laws. He looked at Wolfe then, with the wary reverence of a man who's met a building that talks. I didn't mean to. Albert, he was decent. He was, Wolfe said. Go with Mr. Panzer and do nothing else without instruction for 3 days. Consider that a gift. Saul took him out, like fog takes a lamp. Wolfe shut his eyes again. The line of his mouth had stopped being a blade. It was a curve with thought on it. At 9:07, the phone played its bit. Hanneke's voice came clean through. We're closing for a week, she said. Greer agrees. Mrs. Ransom will sit in the office. The apprentices will scrub and sort. Kedar's sending a list. You could have done that last week, I said. We didn't have a reason everyone agreed on, she said, and hung up without ceremony. Maris emailed a link to a post written with her spine straight. It was less about scandal and more about appetite and fences. I read it to Wolfe. He listened without blinking and said, she may one day be tolerable, which is a benediction from our pulpit. Kedar left a parcel at the door, an apology in spices. Inside, under paper crisp as reprieve, were 2 jars, Aleppo pepper and the good cinnamon. A card said only, to cleanse. The evening was doing what evenings do here after a case, choosing which shelves to put itself on. I used the hour before dinner to make practical adjustments, replacing the screw on the alley catch, checking that the cloche's pedestal hadn't walked, washing the flower lines off the sill. I'm not sentimental about chalk outlines. When I drifted back, Wolfe had a book in his hand. Not a cookbook, a volume of essays with the binding abused by a different man a century ago. He set it down before I could file the title. You drew them with lies, he said, eyes still closed. Bait, I corrected. If a lie is fish food, it wins a prize. You told a lie about color to flush a correction. I detest lies, he said almost idly. But I detest more the men who force them into duty. Women this time, I said. He inclined his head. Women who consented to use a symbol of bread to inflict humiliation. Bread, Mr. Goodwin, is not moral. It is an arrangement of flour and water and heat. But the man who gives it meaning, and the woman who steals that meaning, display themselves. You mean Dawes more than Elia? I mean the habit. Dawes is merely industrious. He opened his eyes. He believes bitterness proves adulthood. That is nonsense. Bitterness proves only that the tongue can register it. What proves adulthood is restraint, the choice not to salt another's wound and call it seasoning. Put that on a chalkboard, I said. Charge admission. He made a sound low in his throat. We charge differently. Fritz feeds, I deduce, you badger. If people leave here having eaten or learned something difficult, we have been paid. I'll add it to the invoice, I said. He leaned back. You laughed at Mr. Dawes's sermons, he said. You should not. He will collect congregants as readily as flies collect in summer. Your city loves absolutes. Always sweet, never sweet. Salt is life, sugar is sin. They will drink slogans. Our task is to keep our house from being a temple to any of them. Starting with vinegar on crust, I said. Especially that, he said, and let his eyelids fall with a finality that told me one thing was left, and he would take his time for it. I gave him the courtesy of stillness until the smell of dinner threaded the office and tied a bow on the day. Fritz announced the meal like a treaty. We went to the dining room, sat where we always do, and took up the tools that return us to ourselves. There was lamb, not sumac tonight as ordered, but with a ribbon of Aleppo and citrus that made the air polite again. We ate without talking for a course and a half, which is our most articulate period. Between the salad and the cheese, the phone rang, yet again. Fritz answered and brought it to me. It was Mrs. Ransom. He had a quote he liked, she said, about bread and hunger. He wrote it on our wall when we opened, behind the first shelf where only we would see it. I don't think he would mind if you knew it. Tell me, I said. She told me. I told Wolfe. He took it in without moving. The line clicked soft back into silence. I expected him to resume eating, a gesture of triumph I could have applauded. He didn't. He sat there with that quote in his gaze like a small, undramatic sunrise, and I saw the last file in him close. What's the verdict? I asked. He drew one breath, and then another, each measured like a final spice. Tomorrow, he said, we will taste sumac. I will not be taught. I will remember. It wasn't a speech, and it wasn't a slogan. It was a sentence with weight in it. I nodded, because my part then was to refill his glass and let the house be itself. Dinner resumed. The brownstone settled. Outside somewhere, a raven mule gathered dust without a camera, which is its natural state. Inside, we ate until there was nothing left to argue with, and I saved my quip for dessert. The meal ended with quiet, which in our house is the loudest conclusion. Fritz brought cheese with poached figs, and Wolfe accepted his portion with the air of a man who had given the world its trial and now claimed his payment. I was ready to chalk it up as closed, but Wolfe never lets a case die without a last dissection. He shifted in his chair, a movement you'd miss if you didn't live here, and fixed me with a look that meant he had one more thread to tie. Archie, you will make a note for Mrs. Ransom. Tell her her husband died of his own heart, not of malice. Tell her the loaf, the stamp, the slogans, all that noise were distractions, not murder. She must not mistake humiliation for homicide. That'll be a comfort? I asked. It will be clarity, he said. Comfort is unreliable. I let that ride. He took a long sip of beer before continuing, and when Wolfe pauses before his final act, it means he's about to put the moral cards on the table. Mr. Dawes will stand before a judge, he said, and he will plead that he only advocated, that he only provoked. He will not comprehend that what he did was worse than poison. Poison kills the body. He poisoned a symbol, the bread of a man who prized apprentices and credit. He made grief perform. Aaliyah too, I said. Yes, Wolfe allowed. But she is a tool. Tools can be repurposed. Dawes is a doctrine in trousers, and doctrines are rarely reformed. He will be celebrated by some, despised by more, and remembered only until the next slogan. And Voss? He will manage. He will tell investors he survived a scandal, and they will nod because they prefer survivors. His punishment will be profit without pride. That is sufficient. He leaned back, closed his bipartisan's eyes, and the office dimmed around him the way it does when his mind settles. The brown stone was whole again. Quiet, guarded, a place where order had been restored without ever leaving the chair. I tried on a quip to test the silence. So the Raven's table gets to clean its drawers, and we get to clean our spice rack. Everybody wins. Wolfe's lips twitched. Not a smile, but a flicker. Phooey, everyone loses. Albert Ransom lost his life too soon. His wife lost her certainty. Apprentices lost a mentor, and humanity lost another occasion to treat bread as what it is, not a stage. If there is a victory here, it is that the farce has been exposed. Exposure is the only disinfectant that works against arrogance. That was his last word on it, and it landed. I topped up his beer, because that's what you do when philosophy has been served, and Fritz cleared the plates as if the argument had been settled in favor of appetite. Later, when Wolfe had retreated upstairs and the house had gone into its night rhythm, I sat with a notebook and wrote down the sequence. The loaf, the stamp, the vinegar joke, the apprentice's nerves, the slogan chalked under specials, the trespass in our kitchen, the false correction. It added up the way his cases always do. Not neat, not happy, but inescapable. Mrs. Ransom would have the truth, even if it wasn't the comfort she wanted. The Raven's table would survive, though its sheen would be scuffed. Dawes would shout from a cell until his voice went hoarse and nobody cared. And Wolfe would go on sitting in that chair, turning phrases into nooses and leaving me to tie the knots. When I shut the notebook, the brownstone was quiet, the kind of quiet that means the house is itself again. Outside, the city was still chewing on bitterness and calling it taste. Inside, we had lamb and figs and order. Wolfe had made his last comment, and it was heavy enough to hold until morning. That was the end of the Raven's bitter loaf. And like any decent meal, it left you full, but not comfortable. Wolfe wouldn't have had it any other way.